MLB issues final punishment after stadium chaos. Pirates coach faces harsh discipline. Shocking scheme to hurt Ohtani. The verdict is in. And it is not light. When Major League Baseball issues a final punishment, it does so with the full understanding that the decision will be examined from every angle. By the teams involved. By the players affected. By the people who follow this sport closely enough to understand what the ruling means not just for the individuals named but for the message it sends to every dugout, every coaching staff, and every person inside a professional baseball organization who might ever consider that what happened in that stadium was something the sport would treat with anything less than complete seriousness. They learned today what the sport thought of it. They learned it clearly. The chaos that erupted inside that stadium did not arrive without warning. Not entirely. There were signs, in the way there are always signs before something breaks open in a public and irreversible way. Tensions that had been building across the series. A scheme that people were beginning to talk about in the spaces where these conversations happen before they become official. A target that made the situation larger than any ordinary baseball incident could be. Shohei Ohtani. And a Pirates coach who now faces the kind of discipline that does not disappear quietly from a professional record. To understand the punishment, you have to understand what the punishment is responding to. The stadium chaos did not erupt because of a single moment of poor judgment. It did not erupt because two players got tangled up on the base paths and tempers ran briefly hot before cooler heads intervened. It did not erupt because of the ordinary combustion that baseball occasionally produces when competitive intensity exceeds the boundaries that the sport normally contains it within. It erupted because of something that had been planned. That word keeps returning to this story because it is the word that changes everything about how the incident is categorized and ultimately how it is punished. Planned. Coordinated. Discussed before the first pitch was thrown. A scheme that involved more than one person and was directed at a specific individual with a specific intention that had nothing to do with winning a baseball game through legitimate means. When that information reached the league office in its full detail, the review that followed was not a routine process. The people conducting it understood what they were looking at. And the punishment they arrived at reflects that understanding completely. The Pirates coach at the center of the discipline finding was not someone operating at the edges of the organization's awareness. That is the detail that made the league's investigation land with the particular weight that it landed with. This was not a player acting independently. This was not two individuals making decisions in isolation from the people responsible for guiding professional conduct within the organization. The coach who now faces harsh discipline was connected to the scheme in a way that the investigation confirmed and that the league office ultimately could not look past when determining what the appropriate response was. A coach carries a different responsibility than a player. That distinction is not subtle. It is built into the entire structure of how professional baseball understands authority, accountability, and the obligation that comes with being in a position of leadership within an organization. Players make mistakes in the heat of competition. Players get caught up in moments that escalate beyond what anyone intended. The sport has processes for those situations and the punishments that result from them exist on a scale that reflects the nature of what occurred. But a coach who participates in or facilitates a coordinated scheme to harm a player on an opposing team is not making a mistake in the heat of competition. That is a decision. And decisions made from positions of authority carry consequences that the league office measures differently. The final punishment was announced through the official channels that these announcements travel through. The formal language. The specific terms. The duration of suspension clearly stated. The conditions attached. The process for any appeal that the individuals involved might choose to pursue. But behind the formal language was something that the formal language does not entirely capture. The anger. Not performed anger. Not the institutional version of displeasure that organizations express when they want to be seen as taking something seriously. The genuine response of a sport that understood what had been directed at Shohei Ohtani and made a deliberate choice about what that was worth in terms of consequences. People familiar with the conversations that happened inside the league office during the review described an environment that was not interested in finding a middle ground. The question being asked was not how to balance the interests of the individuals involved against the severity of what had been alleged. The question being asked was what punishment accurately reflected the nature of a coordinated scheme to physically harm the most prominent player in the sport. The answer they arrived at was significant. Significant enough that when the terms were communicated to the Pirates organization, the response was not immediate public acceptance. Inside the stadium where the chaos had erupted, the aftermath looked the way aftermaths always look when something has broken open in a way that cannot be repaired quickly. Equipment displaced. Staff moving through spaces with the urgent purposefulness of people managing a situation rather than simply occupying a location. The ordinary architecture of a baseball game, the rhythm and the routine and the comfortable familiarity of innings following innings, had been replaced by something that felt unresolved even after the final out had been recorded. The Dodgers players who had been closest to the incident when it escalated described it afterward with the careful language of people who had processed something in real time and were still processing it when the cameras found them. One of them said it felt different from the ordinary intensity of a competitive game. He said he had been in heated situations before. He had been in games where the energy crossed into something uncomfortable and the benches cleared and people said things they would not say in a calmer environment. That was baseball. That was the sport accommodating the human beings who played it. This felt different from that. He said it felt like something underneath the surface of the game had been exposed. Like a structure that looked normal from the outside had revealed what it was actually built on. And what it was built on was not something anyone on the Dodgers side of the field was willing to describe as competitive. He did not say Ohtani's name specifically. He did not need to. Everyone in the room understood who he was describing when he talked about the target. Dave Roberts faced the press with the kind of prepared stillness that he brings to moments where the unprepared version of himself would say considerably more than the situation professionally allows. He confirmed that the Dodgers had been briefed on the league's final ruling. He confirmed that the organization was satisfied that the process had been conducted with the seriousness the situation demanded. He confirmed that Shohei Ohtani had been informed of the outcome and that the Dodgers' focus was now returning to where it belonged. On the field. On the games ahead. On the season. A reporter pushed past the prepared answers and asked Roberts directly how he felt when he first learned the full details of what had been planned. Roberts looked at the reporter for a moment. The stillness shifted slightly. Not dramatically. Not in a way that turned into a soundbite or a moment that would travel through sports media as evidence of a manager losing his composure. Just slightly. In the specific way that stillness shifts when a person is holding something back that they have decided belongs to them rather than to the microphone in front of them. He said he felt what any person would feel when they learned that someone had sat down before a game and planned a way to hurt one of their players. He did not elaborate on what that feeling was. He moved to the next question. But the room had already understood. Don Kelly's situation was the one that carried the most complicated texture. Because Don Kelly had stood in front of cameras after the previous game and said things that were genuine. About competition and respect and the capacity of this sport to produce moments that reminded people why they had given their lives to it. He had watched his players gather around Ohtani after a game and he had not hidden what that did to him. And now he was sitting in front of cameras again with a completely different kind of moment attached to his organization's name. He did not attempt to minimize what the investigation had found. He did not suggest that the process had been unfair or that the league's conclusions had missed something important. He sat with the weight of it in a way that suggested a man genuinely reckoning with the distance between what his organization had done in one moment and what it had allowed to be planned in another. He said the discipline was appropriate. He said it without qualification. Without the hedging language that officials sometimes use when they want to appear cooperative with a process they privately believe went too far. He said it directly. And then he said that the organization would use this moment as something. Not as a public relations exercise. Not as a way of managing the story. as something real that required an honest response from everyone within the Pittsburgh Pirates organization about the standards they were going to hold themselves to going forward. His voice did not break. But it was quiet in the particular way that voices get quiet when the words being said are costing something to say. Shohei Ohtani took batting practice the day the punishment was announced. That detail matters more than it might initially appear to. He was not in a meeting. He was not in a press conference. He was not in any of the spaces where the institutional response to what had happened was being carefully managed and communicated. He was on a baseball field, going through the ordinary preparation of a professional baseball player getting ready to play the next game. Someone near the field watched him for a while. They said later that there was nothing in how he moved or how he worked through his swings or how he carried himself through that practice session that suggested a person distracted by what had been directed at him. There was nothing that looked like fear or hesitation or the residue of learning that two people and a coach had sat down before a game and planned something specific and harmful with his name attached to it. There was just the work. The same work he brings to every session. The same focus. The same commitment to the preparation that makes everything else he does on a baseball field possible. The scheme had been uncovered. The chaos had erupted and settled. The league had issued its final punishment. The discipline had been handed down and the organization responsible had been forced to sit with what that meant. And Shohei Ohtani was taking batting practice. Because that is what he does. That is what he has always done. And no scheme, coordinated or otherwise, had changed that by a single degree.